What would you do if you discovered that the people you worked for were criminals? Would you stay quiet? Would you look the other way and tell yourself it was not your problem? Or would you speak? One man spoke, and it cost him everything. In November 2006, a man was admitted to a London hospital. He was vomiting uncontrollably. He could not eat. He could not sleep. Doctors assumed it was a severe stomach infection. They ran blood tests. They checked for bacterial infections. They found nothing out of the ordinary. He got worse. His hair began falling out. Not gradually, not thinning the way hair does when someone is stressed or aging. It came out in clumps, fistfuls at a time on his pillow. Within days, he was completely bald. His white blood cell count collapsed. His bone marrow was failing. The doctors had never seen anything like this. They transferred him to a specialist unit. They tested for heavy metals. Inconclusive. They tested for known toxins. Inconclusive. They ran every panel, every screen, every diagnostic tool available to modern medicine. Nothing explained what was happening to this man. He was dying. Visibly. Rapidly. And nobody could figure out why. But the man himself knew. Lying in his hospital bed, too weak to sit up, barely able to speak, he told investigators that he knew exactly what had happened to him. He knew who had done it, and he knew why. What the doctors would eventually discover in the final hours of his life would turn this into the most extraordinary murder investigation of the 21st century. It would stretch across an entire city. It would reach into the halls of foreign governments, and it would expose a weapon that the world had never seen used this way before. This is the story of Alexander Litvinenko. And to understand why someone wanted him dead, you have to understand what he knew. Alexander Valterovich Litvinenko was born on August 30th, 1962, in the Russian city of Voronezh. He grew up in a typical Soviet household. His father was a doctor. Young Alexander was quiet, disciplined, studious. He served in the Soviet military as a young man, working with the internal troops of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. He followed orders. He respected the chain of command. He believed in the system. In the late 1980s, as the Soviet Union began to crack apart, Litvinenko transitioned into law enforcement and counterintelligence work. He was good at it. He was noticed by the right people. Eventually, he was recruited into the FSB, the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation. The FSB was not just any government agency. It was the successor to the KGB, the most feared intelligence service in Soviet history. The organization that had surveilled its own citizens for decades. The organization that had silenced dissidents, infiltrated foreign governments, and operated a global network of spies and informants. Under its new name, the FSB carried the same DNA. The same culture, the same methods. Litvinenko worked in the Division for the Investigation of Criminal Organizations. He investigated organized crime, corruption, and the increasingly blurred line between Russian intelligence and the criminal underworld. This was the Russia of the 1990s. The Soviet Union had collapsed. Oligarchs were carving up state assets. Fortunes were being made overnight, and the intelligence services were entangled in all of it. For years, Litvinenko served faithfully. He did what was asked of him. He was a loyal officer of the Russian state. Then in 1998, something happened that changed everything. Litvinenko received an order. The details of what he was told to do would become the subject of debate and denial for years. But according to Litvinenko himself, his superiors at the FSB instructed him and a group of colleagues to carry out an assassination. The target was Boris Berezovsky, a Russian oligarch who had become politically inconvenient. A man who had once been close to the Kremlin, but had fallen out of favor. Litvinenko refused. That alone was extraordinary. FSB officers did not refuse orders. The culture of the organization did not allow for dissent. Refusal was not just insubordination, it was dangerous. But Litvinenko did not stop at refusing. He did something that no FSB officer had ever done before. Something that, looking back, would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately cost him his life. On November 17, 1998, Litvinenko and several fellow FSB officers held a press conference on television in Moscow. They appeared before cameras, some with faces partially concealed, and publicly accused the FSB of criminal activity. They described illegal operations. They alleged that the agency was involved in kidnapping, corruption, and ordering the murders of Russian citizens. Litvinenko spoke openly and named names. In a country where the intelligence services operated with near absolute impunity, where whistleblowers did not survive long enough to tell their stories twice, Alexander Litvinenko stood in front of cameras and called the FSB what he believed it had become: a criminal organization. The response was immediate. Litvinenko was arrested. He was charged with exceeding his authority. He spent months in pretrial detention. He was released. He was arrested again. He was released again. The cycle continued. It was not justice. It was harassment. A slow, grinding reminder of what happened to people who spoke against the state. It became clear to Litvinenko and his family that remaining in Russia was no longer survivable. The FSB did not forgive. It didn't forget. And it had a very long reach. In 2000, while awaiting yet another trial, Litvinenko made his decision. He gathered his wife Marina and their young son Anatoly. They fled Russia. They traveled through Turkey. And they eventually arrived in the United Kingdom, where Litvinenko applied for and was granted political asylum. He was safe, or so he believed. London became his home. He embraced it fully. He would eventually become a British citizen, a fact that filled him with genuine pride. He settled into life in the city. He made friends. He built routines. But he did not go quiet. This is the part of the story where a more cautious man might have disappeared into anonymity, might have changed his name, kept his head down, enjoyed the safety of distance and a new country. Litvinenko did the opposite. He began working as a journalist and consultant, investigating Russian organized crime and intelligence operations from the safety of London. He wrote books. He gave interviews to anyone who would listen. He collaborated with other dissidents and exiles. He consulted with British intelligence on Russian matters, and he had a patron. Boris Berezovsky, the same oligarch Litvinenko claimed he had been ordered to kill, had also fled Russia and was living in London. Berezovsky provided Litvinenko with financial support and a platform. The two men shared a common cause. They both believed the Russian government under its current leadership had become something dangerous, something criminal. Then Litvinenko made his most explosive allegation. In September 1999, a series of apartment bombings had rocked Russia. Explosions tore through residential buildings in Moscow, Bayansk, and Volgodonsk. Nearly 300 civilians were killed. Hundreds more were injured. The Russian government blamed Chechen terrorists. The bombings became the justification for launching the Second Chechen War. And that war, the decisive military response, the image of strength and action, helped propel a relatively unknown former intelligence officer to the presidency of Russia. That man's name does not need to be stated yet. You already know it. But Litvinenko said it loudly and often. He accused the FSB of orchestrating those bombings. He claimed they were a false flag operation. He alleged that the Russian intelligence services had murdered their own citizens, blown up their own apartment buildings, killed nearly 300 of their own people, to manufacture a pretext for war and to install a chosen leader in the Kremlin. Whether those accusations were true has been debated ever since. Independent journalists who investigated the bombings met suspicious ends. A Russian parliament member who pushed for an independent inquiry was assassinated. The journalist Anna Politkovskaya, who reported extensively on Chechnya and the Russian government, was shot dead in her apartment building in Moscow on October 7, 2006, less than a month before Litvinenko sat down in a London hotel. October 2006, a detail that would not become significant until much later. 2 Russian men traveled to London in mid-October. Their names were Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun. Lugovoy was a former KGB bodyguard who had reinvented himself as a businessman after the fall of the Soviet Union. Kovtun was a former Soviet military officer with connections to Russian intelligence circles. They contacted Litvinenko and arranged a meeting. On October 16th, they met at a Japanese restaurant in central London. They sat together. They ate. They talked about potential business opportunities. It was casual, unremarkable. Litvinenko thought nothing of it. He did not get sick after this meeting. Nothing seemed wrong. But weeks later, after everything that was about to happen, forensic investigators would return to that restaurant. They would sweep the tables, the chairs, the surfaces. With specialized detection equipment, and they would find something there. Something that should not have existed in a London restaurant. Something that would rewrite the entire timeline of this case. We will return to what they found. But first, November 1st. November 1st, 2006. A Wednesday. London was gray and cool. Litvinenko had 2 meetings scheduled that day. In the morning, he met with Mario Scaramella, an Italian security consultant, at a sushi restaurant called Itsu in Piccadilly. Scaramella had documents related to investigations into Russian intelligence operations in Europe. They discussed the materials over a working lunch. After that meeting, Litvinenko made his way to the Millennium Hotel in Grosvenor Square. Mayfair, one of the more upscale parts of central London. Lugovoy had called and suggested they meet in the afternoon. He said he had some business matters to discuss. Litvinenko arrived at the Pine Bar on the ground floor of the hotel at approximately 4 in the afternoon. Lugovoy and Kovtun were already there. The bar was quiet. A few other patrons. Nothing unusual. The meeting was short, 15 minutes, perhaps 20. There was a teapot on the table. Litvinenko poured himself a cup. He took a sip. He would later tell investigators that the tea was already cold and that it tasted odd. He left the cup mostly full. He did not think much of it. They wrapped up their conversation. Litvinenko left the hotel and traveled home by bus. That evening he began to feel nauseous. The nausea came first, then vomiting, intense, violent. Relentless vomiting that would not stop. Marina thought it was food poisoning, a bad meal, something that would pass. It didn't pass. By the next day, he was worse. He could not hold down water. His stomach was in agony. Marina took him to the local hospital. Doctors examined him. They diagnosed a likely gastrointestinal infection. They prescribed medication and sent him home. Over the next several days, Litvinenko continued to deteriorate. He returned to the hospital. He was admitted to Barnet General Hospital in North London. Doctors ran more tests, blood panels, cultures, scans. Nothing added up. His symptoms were progressing in ways that did not match any common illness. Then his hair started falling out. It began a few days after admission. Strands at first, then clumps, then all of it. Within a week, he was completely bald. His eyebrows thinned. Even the fine hair on his arms began to disappear. His white blood cell count was collapsing. His bone marrow was being destroyed. His immune system was disintegrating. His body was being attacked from the inside in a way the doctors had never seen. They began to suspect poisoning. The hair loss, the bone marrow failure, the gastrointestinal destruction. These symptoms pointed toward a toxic substance. They tested for thallium, a heavy metal poison known to cause hair loss. Thallium had been used by intelligence agencies in the past. It was sometimes called the poisoner's poison because it was difficult to detect. The results were ambiguous. Some markers were elevated, others were not. It was not a clean match. Meanwhile, Litvinenko was wasting away. He had lost enormous amounts of weight. His skin had yellowed. He was in constant pain. He was conscious. He was lucid. He understood what was happening to him even as the medical team struggled to identify it. Photographs were taken of him during this period. Those photographs would later be released to the public, and they would become iconic, haunting. A man who 3 weeks earlier had been healthy and active, now skeletal and bald, lying in a hospital bed with tubes running from his arms, his eyes sunken but still sharp, still aware, still angry. He was transferred to University College Hospital, where specialists in toxicology and internal medicine took over his care. They expanded the testing. They searched for every known toxic agent. They consulted with experts across the country. They were running out of time, and they still did not know what was killing him. On November 22nd, Litvinenko's heart stopped. Medical staff resuscitated him, but his organs were failing. One by one, his kidneys, his liver, his bone marrow had been virtually destroyed. The doctors told Marina that there was nothing more they could do. On November 23, 2006, 22 days after that meeting at the Millennium Hotel, Alexander Litvinenko died. But in the final hours before his death, two things happened. First, scientists at the Atomic Weapons Establishment in Aldermaston, working with samples from Litvinenko's body, finally identified the substance that had killed him. It was not thallium. It was not any conventional poison. It wasn't anything that any medical team in any hospital anywhere in the world would have routinely tested for. It was polonium-210, a radioactive isotope. If you have never heard of polonium-210, there is a good reason. It is one of the rarest substances on Earth. It is millions of times more radioactive than uranium. A single microgram, a speck smaller than a grain of sand, invisible to the naked eye, is enough to kill a human being. It is estimated to be 250 billion times more toxic than hydrogen cyanide. And it has a property that makes it unlike almost any other radioactive material. It emits alpha radiation. Alpha particles are deadly inside the body, but they cannot penetrate skin from the outside. They cannot be detected by a standard Geiger counter. They do not trigger radiation alarms at airports or border crossings. A person could carry a vial of polonium-210 in their pocket and walk through any security checkpoint in the world without setting off a single alarm. But once ingested, once swallowed, once it enters the bloodstream, it destroys everything. It shreds DNA at the molecular level. It annihilates the bone marrow that produces blood cells. It attacks the gut lining, the liver, the kidneys. It kills slowly and with tremendous suffering over days or weeks. It is the perfect assassination weapon, nearly undetectable, nearly untraceable. If the doctors at University College Hospital had not specifically thought to test for alpha-emitting isotopes in the very final hours of Litvinenko's life, the cause of death would likely have remained unknown. It would have been classified as an unexplained medical event, a mystery. But they did test for it, and they found it. And then came the question that changed everything. Where does polonium-210 come from? You cannot buy it. You cannot steal it from a hospital or a university laboratory. You cannot synthesize it in a basement. Polonium-210 in lethal quantities is produced in nuclear reactors. In 2006, the primary producer of polonium-210 in the world was the Avant-Garde facility in the closed city of Sarov, Russia, a facility operated under the direct authority of the Russian state. The murder weapon could only have come from a state with a nuclear program. The second thing that happened in Litvinenko's final hours was this. He dictated a statement. He was too weak to write. Too weak to hold a pen. Too weak to sit up. But his mind was clear. He knew he was dying, and he knew this was his last chance to speak. A friend transcribed his words. The statement was released to the public after his death. In it, Litvinenko thanked his doctors and nurses. He thanked the British police. He thanked the British government, and said he was honored to be a British citizen. Then he said this: "You may succeed in silencing me, but that silence comes at a price. You may succeed in silencing one man, but the howl of protest from around the world will reverberate, Mr. Putin, in your ears for the rest of your life." He named the president of Russia directly, from his deathbed, with his final words. He accused Vladimir Putin of ordering his murder. "May God forgive you for what you have done, not only to me, but to beloved Russia and its people." He died that evening. His body was so contaminated with radiation that it had to be sealed in protective wrapping. The hospital staff who had spent 3 weeks caring for him, unaware that their patient was radioactive, had to be tested for contamination. His funeral would eventually require a lead-lined coffin. His remains will be radioactive for decades. But the investigation was only beginning, because polonium-210, for all its stealth as a weapon inside the body, has one critical weakness as a tool of assassination. It leaves traces. Radioactive traces. Wherever it goes, it marks the surfaces it touches. And those traces can be detected with the right equipment. When investigators began sweeping London with alpha radiation detectors, what they found was staggering. They found contamination at the Millennium Hotel. They found massive concentrations in the Pine Bar. They found it specifically in a teapot. The teapot that had been on the table where Litvinenko sat with Lugovoy and Kovtun on November 1st. The poison had been in the tea. A man had been killed with a nuclear substance dissolved into a cup of tea in a London hotel bar. But the trail did not stop at the Millennium Hotel. Investigators followed it outward. They found contamination at multiple hotels where Lugovoy and Kovtun had stayed across London. They found it in cars, in offices, in restaurants. They found it at the Emirates Stadium, where Lugovoy had attended an Arsenal football match. Thousands of football fans had potentially been exposed to trace radiation without knowing it. They found contamination on aircraft. Multiple British Airways planes that had carried Lugovoy and Kovtun between London and Moscow tested positive. Tens of thousands of passengers who had traveled on those aircraft had to be notified and offered medical screening. The radioactive trail stretched across London like a glowing map of the murder. And every single line on that map led back to 2 men. And then, investigators returned to the Japanese restaurant from October 16th. The earlier meeting, the casual lunch that had seemed so unremarkable, they swept it with detectors. They found polonium-210 there too. The October meeting had not been a casual lunch. It had been a first attempt, a failed attempt. For reasons unknown, whether the dose was insufficient, the delivery method failed, or luck intervened. Litvinenko had not ingested enough to kill him that day. They had tried once and failed. So they came back 2 weeks later and tried again. In May 2007, the British Crown Prosecution Service formally charged Andrei Lugovoy with the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. Britain submitted an extradition request to Russia, demanding that Lugovoy be sent to London to stand trial. Russia refused. The Russian constitution, they said, did not permit the extradition of Russian citizens. Lugovoy would not be surrendered. He would not face a British court. He would not answer questions under oath. Lugovoy held a press conference in Moscow. He denied everything. He accused British intelligence of killing Litvinenko. He called the charges politically motivated. And then Andrei Lugovoy, the man formally charged by Britain with carrying a nuclear weapon into the heart of London and using it to murder a British citizen, was elected to the Russian State Duma. He became a member of parliament. He received full parliamentary immunity from criminal prosecution. The man accused of nuclear assassination was rewarded with political power. Dmitry Kovtun, the second man in the Pine Bar that day, also remained in Russia. He was never extradited. He was never charged by Russian authorities. He never faced trial. He lived freely until his death from natural causes in 2022. For nearly a decade, Marina Litvinenko fought for a public inquiry. The British government resisted. The diplomatic implications were enormous. Officially accusing a nuclear-armed state of assassinating someone on British soil was not something any government undertook lightly. But Marina did not stop. She attended every hearing. She filed every motion. She pushed when the government wanted to let it quietly fade away. In 2016, the inquiry published its findings. Sir Robert Owen, the chairman, had reviewed classified intelligence, forensic evidence, witness testimony, and years of investigative work. The conclusions were devastating and unprecedented. The inquiry found that Litvinenko was killed by Lugovoy and Kovtun, that they poisoned him by putting polonium-210 in his tea at the Pine Bar of the Millennium Hotel, that the October meeting had been a prior failed attempt, that the operation was directed by the FSB, and then it stated something that no official British inquiry had ever said before. It concluded that the assassination was probably approved by the director of the FSB, Nikolai Patrushev, and by the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. The British government officially concluded that the president of a foreign nation had probably ordered the nuclear assassination of a British citizen on British soil. Russia denied everything. They called the findings absurd. They refused to acknowledge any involvement. No one was ever tried. No one was ever convicted. No one ever went to prison for the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. Alexander Litvinenko was buried at Highgate Cemetery in London. His coffin was lined with lead because his body was still radioactive. It will remain so for decades to come. Even in death, the weapon that killed him continues to emanate from his remains. Marina Litvinenko stood outside the Royal Courts of Justice after the inquiry findings were published and said she was satisfied that the truth had finally been recognized. The truth, but not justice. There is a difference. The men who killed her husband lived freely. The government accused of ordering the operation continued to operate on the world stage. Diplomatic protests were filed, sanctions were imposed, ambassadors were recalled. But Alexander Litvinenko remained dead, and his killers remained unpunished. He was a man who refused an order to kill, who stood before cameras and told the truth about one of the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world, who fled his country to protect his family, who continued speaking even when speaking was dangerous, who named the powerful even when naming them meant death. And in the end, he was killed for it. Not with a bullet, not with a knife, not with any weapon that a normal investigation would ever think to look for. He was killed with a substance so rare that most doctors would never encounter it in their entire careers. A substance that could only have come from inside a nuclear facility. A substance that was dissolved into a teapot in a London hotel bar and served to him as a cup of tea on a Wednesday afternoon, while businessmen in suits drank cocktails at the next table. His final words, dictated from a hospital bed in a body that was already more dead than alive, accused the most powerful man in Russia of ordering his murder. He said the howl of protest would reverberate in Putin's ears for the rest of his life. Whether it has, only one man knows. But the world heard Alexander Litvinenko, and the world remembers. A man sat down for tea in a London hotel. He took a sip, and it killed him. The men who did it were never punished. Some stories do not have satisfying endings. This is one of them.